first 10 people that start a conversation in our Facebook group we'll get some free merchandise. We're really excited. We are in the process right now of doing some t-shirt designs that will have some of our RAID acronyms on them. So you get to wear how to complete the emotional cycle on your chest or on your back.
There you go.
I'm excited.
They have to stand in the mirror with another mirror so that you can read it. No, it's for advertisement.
Maybe I should do it upside down so that way all you have to do is, like, when you look at the floor, you've got your cue to how to do the RAID acronym. That could be really fun. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Alrighty, so Mormons and Addiction. And you know, in the title here, I put "say what" with a bunch of question marks at the end. But what I really wanted to
explain the question marks
wanted to put is Mormons and Addiction, WTF, for what the f, because that is really kind of where my opinion has landed on Mormon Church. What are you doing with your definition of addictive behavior? And I know that the Mormon Church is not alone in this really non-medical diagnoses of addiction for behaviors that the church defines as toxic. And I'm going to say in some ways these behaviors are, and in other ways they are not. So content warning for today's episode, we are going to be talking a lot about pornography. And we're also going to be talking about addiction. I want to also preface this episode to say that addiction treatment is not my expertise. It's not my wheelhouse. Yes, I've been trained on how to do it. Yes, I've got some foundational skills there, but this is not the client population that I serve. Rather, my role in treating addictions has been more of that, Mason, what is it called? Adjunct. I'm an adjunct treatment person in the sense that I can be your accountability person. I will work with people through the mental health piece that goes along with addiction. But usually if I'm treating somebody who's struggling with addiction, I am one of a member of providers that are providing services for people with addiction.
Yeah. What excited me about the topic is your ability to, you know, one of the things we've talked about a lot is that usually when there's addiction going on, real addiction going on in someone's life, there's other things that are underlying issues that are going on, whether it's attachments or trauma, things like that. I wanted to just kind of have that reminder because I think Mormons are afraid of addiction, and maybe other people are too.
I would say most of the world is afraid of addiction because when we talk about addiction, there's this idea of a loss of control.
Yeah.
And that's true. In addiction, there is, to varying degrees, depending on the addiction, the substance, the behavior, whatever it is that we're talking about, there is definitely a feeling of a loss of control. So, yeah, it's a scary thing.
It is. I think, though, that for Mormons and maybe Christians as well, it's not the loss of control that I think is the big fear. It's the loss of the soul that is the big fear.
Can you say more about that?
I think that whether you're concerned about yourself or somebody else, I think that there's this underlying, and I'm not sure I can put my finger on as to why this is going on. I think I have some ideas in my head, but there's this underlying idea that if you get caught up in addiction, you're doomed, that you're going to hell or you're going to outer darkness for Mormons or the celestial kingdom. At the very least, you will not live up to the potential that they had hoped for. And I think that comes with a huge degree of misunderstanding what's going on for people. For one, if you get caught up into addiction, like the big scare when I was growing up, and I know our kids go through this as well too, is that you go to a party and somebody spikes a drink.
Right.
And then you're automatically struggling. That was the thought process. And I know it happens for some people, but that was the thought process that now you're a heroin addict because somebody, gave you some and you didn't even know about it. And that's a scary thought. But the idea that somehow seems to follow that is this kid is now addicted to heroin. He's going to hell. Sucks for him. But the whole idea is bass backwards. Like, they got into something, didn't even really know what to expect. It's not like it was their fault that it happened. And now they're in a situation they don't know how to control. And you've condemned them to hell over it. And I think that we need to be able to see things differently. We need to be able to see the people first and then understand what's going on with them so that we as people on the outside, or even maybe if we're struggling with it ourselves, can have more grace.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that, I am definitely not the expert on this topic, not at all. But I have more expertise in this area from a treatment perspective or a mental health perspective than your average person who does not have direct experience with addiction. And so just some of the things, Mason, that came to mind when you're describing this fear that, like the Halloween candy would be spiked and suddenly you would have an addict. And I mean, the idea is so embedded in myth. I mean, that's just not the way you get addicted. For one, if I give a child some candy laced with something, that child is not going to even have any idea what substance it is that they're addicted to, or even have the abilities to get it. And most addicts are not going to randomly lace somebody's candy with their very precious substance that they are dependent on, oftentimes for survival. And I think that that's something that we really need to talk about, is that oftentimes when we are talking about substance abuse, the person that is struggling with the addiction, the addict, cannot cut that out of their system cold turkey without very negative health consequences. And so this is something that if you are truly struggling with an addiction, which we're going to talk about the difference in use, abuse, addiction, those types of things today from an educational standpoint. But if you're struggling with a true addiction, you absolutely need help. This is not something that you can overcome or muscle through on your own. And I think that one of the challenges that we see in religions, and one of the things that we saw within Mormonism, was this idea that if you were struggling with it, you needed to keep it a secret, because if people knew about it, then there would be issues. And then the other thing, Mason, that you and I had talked about in prep for today's podcast was, in our experience, it's almost like a pornography addiction is supposedly worse and more destructive than a substance abuse addiction. And I'm going to say, pornography, absolutely, a true sex addiction absolutely can be more destructive than a substance abuse, but you really cannot categorize what's worse and what's not worse, because as the addict will tell you, their substance of choice damaged almost everything in their lives.
Right.
And so we really cannot label these things. The labels just don't work. I also want to put this caveat out there that if I get tearful, Mason and I had been prepping and talking about this podcast now for several months. And just a few weeks ago, I lost my first client to an overdose. And that kind of set us doing this podcast back, because I just was not in the brain space where I could talk about that, because as an adjunct provider, an adjunct is not the word I'm looking for. But this client had a medical doctor, they had an addictions specialist counselor, they had, the group therapy, they had all of the interventions there. And I was a part of that team, working more as an accountability partner and a liaison between the client and family members, in order for them to work through some of the mental health illness and the emotional wounds that were going on. And to lose a client, this is the first time that's happened for me in my career, was devastating. Absolutely devastating, absolutely heart-wrenching. And I can't talk about the specifics of that case because of HIPAA. But I also want, our listeners to know that I'm coming at this as somebody who has been a quote unquote victim of what Mormons identify as an addictive behavior in my partner, Mason, which he can share that bit of his story later. But then I've seen the real life altering impact that addiction has had on people close to me and on my clients. And the way that I would say Mormons define addiction is just really uneducated. It's really premature. They're screaming addiction for things that don't even come close to that terminology. And so that's really what we're going to dive in and dissect today. Our intent for today is to educate. I'm not going to give you a lot of treatment options because, again, this is not my wheelhouse. But if you are truly struggling, if you listen today and you say, you know what, I am struggling with overuse, abuse, or addiction, I want you to be able to know how to get help.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that is just as dangerous is this not having a good educated perspective on what abuse is, because like you said in your clinic, you've seen people push a companion away for what you would call nothing close to an addiction. They're calling it an addiction. You're like, not even close, but it still drives a wedge between two people,
right?
Because you don't understand, you're uneducated about what to expect. And if you live in this world of fear of addiction, you may immediately think, what's the point? You know, there's no coming back from this because of everything I quote unquote know, no coming back. And I think that if we can have some realistic understanding of it, that will be helpful for us.
Right. Absolutely. So where I want to start is let's talk about the spectrum, this addiction spectrum or this, substance or whatever, within Mormonism, the one that I hear the most often about is sex addiction that doesn't come anywhere close to that, or a porn addiction that doesn't even come anywhere close to a true addiction. So when we're talking about an addiction, no matter if that addiction is a behavior or a substance, there's going to be different areas that we classify your use of that behavior or that substance. And the first one is going to be use. So I use alcohol. Me, Sarah Westbrook, I will come home at the end of a long day and I will drink a glass of wine. I am utilizing alcohol. And for me, I do that because it kind of takes the edge off, helps me wind down. And I find that for me, I am more relaxed around my children at the end of the day, which is usually one of the hardest times of the day for me. My alcohol use is in no way, shape, or form anywhere near an addiction. I've also gone out on some cruises with a girlfriend. So I've got a really close friend, Danny, love you so much. If you're listening, we're overdue for another drinking cruise. But I went on a cruise with this friend and we drank a lot. I would say, in the upwards of 6 drinks, for me, 6 to 8 a day. She drinks me into the under the bridge, whatever you call it. Her tolerance is much higher than mine, and whatnot. But that was for a week time period. And then when I got back from the cruise, I'm not drinking anywhere near that capacity. It's not a binge drinking thing. It would still fall under that term of use. Why do I say that? Why does, my 1 drink a day and then I go on a week vacation, 6 drinks a day on a cruise ship, Sarah, come on, that sounds really extreme. Well, it comes down to, can I function without the substance? Am I craving it? Am I hiding my use of it? We're talking about
other
patterns
behaviors,
of behaviors, right? So somebody's use of a substance is not the only data point. Even if I was drinking 6 drinks a day, does that make me an alcoholic? Not necessarily, although those red flags are definitely much higher.
Sure.
So
your body might disagree at that point in time,
right,
as to whether or not you have an addiction.
Well, and we talk about alcohol, so now let's talk about prescription medication. 6 pills a day might actually be within what I'm prescribed. That 6 pills a day could be an addiction for somebody and not for somebody else. I just read Matthew Perry's new book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. that is his memoir. Oh my goodness, I'm stumbling all over my words. All I know, y'all, so squirrel moment is at the very end of the book, Matthew Perry said that he is looking for a partner and he wants somebody that is 5'2" and brunette. It says that in the book. And Mason, how long has Matt Perry been on my list? Y'all, I am 5'2", blue eyes. I'm a brunette. And Matthew Perry just announced in his book that I am his type. And he's been on my list for the entirety of Mason's and my marriage. So, put a plug in there. Matthew Perry, I'm married, but you're on my list. Let's talk. Mason's over there shaking his head. Anyway, friends, lovers, and the big terrible thing, one of the things that Matthew Perry pointed out was that at the height of his addiction, he was taking 55 Oxycontins a day. And so my 6 and his 55, both of those could be classified as an addiction, but my 6 also could be classified not as an addiction. So we've got to look at the other patterns of behaviors that are there. On that spectrum, we've got the use and we've got the overuse. So possibly my 6 drinks a day on a cruise would be considered overuse. And so we've really got to look at these patterns. When we get into abuse, we are also looking at what is the intent with which I am utilizing a substance, because intent, or the reasons that we're choosing a substance, is going to indicate whether or not we're overusing, abusing, or that we are addicted to a substance. And so, if
I think that's one of the most important pieces. Yeah.
Well, you can say most important. I'm gonna challenge most important. I don't think any of these are more important than the other. I think it's very individualized. For some people, the intent is the identifying feature that this is an addiction, and for others, it's not. It varies, and so this is where you really need to see somebody. If you think you have an abuse or an addiction issue, you definitely need a team of people to help you with this. And this is for chocolate. This is for sex. This is for shopping. We talk about shopping addictions. What is your intent? And it could be to escape feelings. It could be to numb feelings out. It could be to get a rise. It could be to feel more. There's lots of different reasons here. And so again,
to feel it all.
Right, to feel it all. Right. I want to make sure though that we're putting this on a spectrum.
Right.
Because use is not abuse. But if you're abusing, you're using. So we get to start playing with these. We get to start playing with these words a little bit. And that's an important thing. We've really got to understand this spectrum. And really, I think that's where the Mormon Church gets tied up with this, is in that use equals abuse or use equals addiction. And that's just simply not true.
And I think in my experience, I find too that use, not recognizing the difference between use, overuse, and abuse, and whatever other labels are on that spectrum, it allows for a lot of shame to come into the picture. If use is considered abuse or an addiction, there's a lot of shame that's allowed to come in and will isolate, or you won't get the support that you need from people in order to overcome whatever. Like, for instance, pornography. When I struggled with pornography, there was a huge amount of shame and guilt because it's not in line with the kind of person that I want to be. Whether or not, and I'm sure you'll talk about this a little bit today, but whether or not a little bit of pornography or a lot of pornography is healthy or unhealthy, it wasn't in line with who I wanted to be. And consequently, a lot of guilt and shame came down on me. And now when I'm feeling shamed, I don't want to talk to somebody else.
I want to say self-shame, Do you feel like that was coming from other places, or was it mostly within yourself that shame was coming?
Mostly within myself. But I would say mostly simply because once I start to feel that shame, I'm not in a place where I want to talk about it. I don't know if there would have been shame from other people, because the few people that are aware, some of them responded with shame, some of them didn't. But yes, there was an awful lot of personal shame. I felt a lot of shame for me because it wasn't in line with what I wanted to be. And of course, there's all these messages that I've received since I was a kid about how essentially, quote unquote, dirty I am now, and how I'm being unfaithful to you. And I'm all these different things that are coming in. And it's the shame that really is such a big deal if you can't categorize things in a way that allows for a healthy walk through this journey.
Right, or healthy dialogue even.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the issues that I see a lot. And I would like to say, if you're using, because I would say, Mason, your pornography use was never overuse. It was very occasional, very infrequent, based on what you've told me.
I agree.
And so, one of the challenges, though, is that when you're using your substance in secret or going, doing things to keep it hidden, that's a flag.
Right.
So if I'm using, even just my kids, if my kids are vaping in the bathroom at the school, which is a pretty common thing that occurs in our high school and middle school bathrooms nowadays, that kids will try out vaping or try out a cigarette or something in the bathroom, that they're trying it out and experimenting almost never leads to an addiction. I mean, it absolutely can, but when you look at the number of people who have tried cigarettes that are now chain smokers, it's relatively small, and whatnot. Most kiddos, there's just not the hype that there used to be that made it cool and whatnot. And so there's a lot of social pressure, and I don't have those statistics in front of me, but that experimenting in the bathroom in secret and not talking about it absolutely raises the risk exponentially that you're going to develop an overuse, abuse, or addiction problem later.
Or not. I think for me, the big thing is not feeling like you can talk about it. Whether or not you could. Like, I probably could have come to you way earlier than I did and talked about it. I don't know. But I didn't feel like I could. There was something, actually, we were watching Young Sheldon last night. And
okay, hang on, time out. Our 3 youngest children love that show. Like, it is their favorite thing to watch on the planet. Santa Claus stuffed their stockings with some Young Sheldon DVDs, and we can watch them on repeat, and they will laugh hysterically. It's the cutest thing ever. Go ahead, Mason.
Yeah. So we're watching, and I love it too, because there's lots of funny parts, but there's also some pretty poignant parts, and this was pretty poignant. Mom comes, Sheldon's mom, and dealing with the other 2 children. Sheldon's not in this part here, but mom comes into the garage and talks to her son, who's probably 16, 17 years old, who's working out, and says, and he says something along the lines, why won't you let her go to the dance?
Right. Why won't you let Sister Missy go to the dance?
Go to the dance. And the reason is because they're Baptists, and so she doesn't believe that they should go to dances. But he says, I went to tons of dances. I just didn't ask you. And he said, be grateful she's still asking. And I thought that was incredibly poignant, because not that means you should just let your kids do whatever. But if they're coming to you and asking, there needs to be more than just a, no, you can't do that. That's an opportunity for us to talk about it. There's an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little better. Why is this important to you? And so on. And sometimes our kids are going to make decisions we're not happy with, and sometimes they're going to make the decisions we really would like them to make. But if the conversation isn't there, they're going to do things that you don't want them to do.
Right.
And if we can talk about it, you were always good at this, and maybe I'm squirreling a little bit, but you were always really good at this, in that the kids were safe to come and talk. And you would say, look, if you do these things, and I know some of this stuff is going to happen, I want you to be able to come and talk to me about it. I want you to be able to do it in a safe way. If you're thinking of experimenting with alcohol, come to me, let's talk about it so we can do it in a safe way. If that's what you want, I'm here to help facilitate you doing things in a safe way so that you know what's coming and so on.
I think
you're with someone safe.
Right. One of the things that I very much prided myself in with our oldest, whose male is, we talked about no means no. We talked about safe sex practices. We talked about waiting until you're with somebody that you want to have a commitment with. Like, we had all of those conversations. We even had the conversations of wait until you're married. Although because of my experiences in high school and because of my profession, I was like, all right, statistically speaking, our kids are not going to be in the virgins at time of marriage. So let's make sure that we don't have lifelong consequences that they aren't quite ready to deal with because of decisions they make when they're young. And I know, Mason, that, you weren't available a whole lot during that time for our oldest because of medical school and whatnot. And I remember having that.
Nor did I have the capacity, I think. I'm in a better place now, but at the time, I don't think I had the capacity to have those honest conversations.
And so I started bugging Eric, like when he went to homecoming or other dates or he was out with friends, I would be like, hey, man, you need some condoms. And he's like, no, Mom, I'm good. I don't need anything. And I want to say he was about 17 when he looked at me and he said, Mom, you don't need to ask me that anymore. If I need condoms, I know how to get them myself. And I was like, phenomenal. Great. And that is when I stopped asking him, do you need my help in getting you the things that you need to be safe? That if you're going to, because he'd be like, I haven't even met somebody that I'm interested in doing that with. Great. Still have condoms. Just in case. You never know when teens, when hormones and blah, blah, blah happen. Just let me know. And then the other thing that was really interesting that I was really, that I said as a parenting win that kind of illustrates that point was, when Eric first started to try. And Eric, I love you. If you're listening to this, I hope you're not mad at me for talking about your stuff here. If you are, I'll take the episode down. But was when he went and spent some time with my brother. My brother kind of pressured him into trying some alcohol, and it was like, I won't tell your mom. You don't need to tell your mom, blah, blah, blah. And Eric was like, no, if I'm going to try that, I'm going to talk to my mom about it. Like, I have no issues going to my mom and letting her know, hey, I tried this, because we'd had those talks already about, look, if you're at a party and you get pressured into trying this, number one, my kids had tasted it at our house anyway first. And I was one of those, mean moms. I gave them straight up whiskey or something first so that it'd be nasty and make them smart and be like, I don't want to taste that, because I wanted to kill the curiosity factor. Like, what does alcohol taste like? Well, here you go. This is what it tastes like. Try that with me. So now when somebody's like, hey man, do you want some whiskey? You can be like, no man, that's nasty stuff. I don't want that. But also so that it would
saves
open
them from the embarrassment of that moment too.
Right. Well, and I have to chuckle because all of my kids' first reactions to alcohol have been like, whoa, why would anybody drink that? And I'm like,
pretty much been my reaction as well.
It has been. It was mine too, actually. So, but to kind of kill that curiosity when there's a lot of pressure, they can be like, hey, I've tried that. That's not my thing. And, for us to be able to talk about, your peers are going to pressure you. This is normal. They're not trying to be jerks. Those types of things. We have those conversations. And I'm really grateful for that, because when Eric got into some trouble, being a young teenager, he came to me and I was able to help him get out of trouble and hopefully prevented some of that. And that really leads me into the next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to addiction. Because when we look at people who struggle with true addiction, one of the commonalities is childhood trauma, especially around sexual abuse or parental abandonment. And that when we start talking to people about how they got stuck in these addiction cycles, most of them have significant sexual abuse trauma or abandonment. There's been a break in their ability to attach within relationships that is present. And what we found in treatment is that if we can help people heal and learn how to have healthy relationship attachments, their success rate at staying sober or away from the addictive behavior or other substance, if it's chocolate or food, we see a lot of food addiction going on as well in today's society. that attachment, those healthy relationships are actually the best barrier for relapse. And then I believe, and please don't quote me on this, but I believe the third most common reason for falling into addiction is actually physical injury, where you get prescribed medicines or
Makes
something
sense, yeah.
and you have the addiction disease. Because what we know now in the literature is that addiction is a disease. And so Mason, I gave us 2 books that I wanted to talk about. So Mason, go ahead. What's that first one that you've got right in front of you?
So this one is Understanding Addiction, No Science, KNOW, No Science, comma, No Stigma, NO Stigma. So No Science, No Stigma by Dr.
Basically, let me rephrase that. So understanding addiction, you need to know your science in order to kill the stigma.
Right.
No science, no stigma.
Right.
And who's
exactly.
that by, Mason?
By Dr. Chuck Smith and Dr. Jason Hunt.
And the reason that I really like this book, and it's one that I have here in my clinic for clients to check out and
it's
read.
small. This is
Right,
maybe
it's-
100 pages?
Yeah, it's not a
120
long
pages.
read. It's an easy read. It's quick, but it really busts a lot of those myths. A lot of those myths, like my kid's going to go to prom, the punch is going to be spiked, and now they're going to be an alcoholic. It just doesn't work that way for most people. I mean,
Right.
you might have your 1 or 2 people out there that are like, I had my first taste and I was just hooked. It normally does not work that way.
Right.
It can. So it dispels a lot of those myths, and it talks about the science behind addiction and really helps us understand it from the disease process that it is. And we're back. Alrighty, so the second book that I give that's that clinical stuff for family members or clients struggling with addiction is called Unbroken Brain, A Revolutionary New Way of Understanding Addiction. And I do not know how to pronounce this name, Maia, M-A-I-A.
I think it's Maia.
Maia, and then
Szalavitz.
Szalavitz. There we go. We'll let Mason do this.
Most likely, but I could be wrong.
So anyway, and we'll have these linked in the show notes for sure. And this Maia was a co-author of the book The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, which is an absolutely wonderful book on trauma and understanding trauma. So we'll do that plug-in as well. But what I loved about The Unbroken Brain is that she really talks about and digs into how healthy relationship attachments are protectants against developing addiction. So I really want to put those plugins there. And then I absolutely recommend Matthew Perry's book. Skip the part about the 5'2" brunette because he was talking specifically to me at the very end of that book. So skip that. That was a message just to me, Mason. I'm sorry. I'm heading to LA to hunt him down because I'm that 5'2" brunette girl here. So anyway, but one of the things
You are a hottie.
Thanks, babe. One of the things that I absolutely loved about Matthew Perry's memoir is that he didn't pull any punches. He was very raw about his experiences as an addict. And I think it's really important to hear those experiences from people who truly struggle with addiction in order to demonstrate compassion and understanding rather than that shaming piece. Matthew Perry talks about anhedonia or anhedonia means that you do not feel pleasure when good things happen to you or in doing things that you enjoy. Anhedonia is a negative symptom of schizophrenia, actually. It's when I first learned the term was when I was very confused because my oldest son, Brig, who has schizophrenia, would do things that he was like excited about or something that he'd wanted, and then he had no pleasure. There was no excitement. There was no joy. We'd get home and be like, hey, how was that? And he'd be like, meh, that's fine, whatever. And that anhedonia is a disease process. It is something that is wrong with what the theory is that there's something going on with the dopamine receptors in the brain, or your pleasure receptors. You don't fire those, and you can develop this because of substance abuse, or it can be just a part of your anatomy. So like for Brig, his comes as what we call the negative symptoms. So positive symptoms of schizophrenia means things like hallucinating.
Means the presence of
Right,
things,
the presence of it. And then the negative symptoms are the absence of things. And so one of the negative symptoms of schizo is no pleasure in doing things. And so Matthew Perry talks about the fact that he has this. And so even though he's this hugely successful, if not one of the most, one of the 6 most popular and successful television stars of all time, still not feeling happy or satisfied in life. And so with that in mind, I think that this book that just came out recently, I saw it in the airport on my way to Orlando, bought it on my Kindle before I hopped on the plane, and had that read before I got home. And I thought it was brilliantly done. And it was a very honest look, because I remember growing up, the book that was really popular within my Mormon community that my dad made me read was the book Go Ask Alice, which actually isn't true at all. That book, and I don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's not a true story at all. It was completely made up. It's fiction. But it was presented as the journal of a drug addict.
Right,
and
this was the way to ward you off from living this lifestyle.
Well, and it worked, because in the book Go Ask Alice, I think she got, it was alcohol or drugs laced in her soda. I think it was drugs that she ate. And I remember later going, can you even get high from eating that? Like, I don't remember. I'd have to actually go back and look and reread the book, which I have no time doing because it's fiction. But I remember reading that. And then later in the addictive process, it was like she was having sex with statues in a public park. And for me, it worked really good. I was like, oh, hell no. I don't want to drink alcohol or do drugs and then go have sex with a statue. So yeah, when it came out that book was not true, that it was not an actual journal as it had been purported to be, I think it was actually written by a Mormon trying to ward people off of addiction that presented it. Are you looking that up now, Mason? Mason's looking it up. He'll give you the real story on Wikipedia.
There's a few different copies here, so I'm just kind of perusing them. One is, it says Anonymous Diaries. So I don't know if maybe I don't know.
No, that's the one that it was written by Anonymous. Go Ask Alice. But yeah, it's been debunked. It's not a true story. And so anyway, I really appreciate Matt's book, because it gives you a real look into the life of somebody who supposedly has everything and is still struggling with addiction. And as you read that, you're going to see that attachment trauma that is so commonly reported in people who struggle with true addiction.
Yeah. I think that's why this conversation is so important. Recognizing that there's more to the story. I mean, I think academically we all understand there's usually more to the story, but if we can get past the academic and just understand emotionally and that there's more to the story, there'll be a lot less judgment and a lot more, at least, attempts to understand people and what they're going through and why they're going through what they're going through.
Right. Absolutely. So Mason, as far as the educational piece, do you have any questions for me before we move into Mormonism and addiction?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I'm good.
Alrighty. So listeners, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I may not know the answer because, again, I do not work specifically with addiction only. I work as a network provider for people struggling with that. I am somebody there to help on that mental health healing side, not specific to the addiction side of things. But I have several colleagues that I consult with and several that I would trust with a family member if I had a family member struggling with addiction. that I would be able to refer you to, that would be happy to take your emails and your questions. So if you have those, please don't hesitate to reach out at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
We want people to be able to heal. So absolutely. Yeah.
So when it comes to understanding addiction in the view of Mormonism, like we've said before, the one that comes to mind first for me is pornography use. And I was really excited as a Mormon to read the Gottman study that pornography use, consensual pornography use within marriage, tended to have a negative impact on the relationship. And I don't know what those stats look like. I need to do my Gottman refresher course in order to be brought up to date on a lot of those stats, because it wasn't as black and white as, things like a marital affair was. And I have lots of clients that would have, different reports of varying degrees of efficacy or inefficacy. Again, I work with clients that are in open relationships. And as far as I know, the Gottmans don't really have anything that studies open relationships or some of these less traditional relationship types.
I thought you said that recently there had been some stuff that had come out on open relationships and how they can be healthy or unhealthy and so on.
Yeah. So I remember what I was reading, and I'd have to go back and look at it and I'd have to find it again, was that the communication style in the clinic was effective from like that clinical thing. As far as that being directly from the Gottmans, I don't remember if that was coming from the Gottman Institute or if that was coming from people who were Gottman trained that were utilizing the same skills and having positive results. And I can speak for my own clinic when I work with non-traditional relationship types, meaning open relationships or swinging and those types of things. That I would use the Gottman communication skills with great success for those clients.
Right.
Where the Gottman research absolutely covers are monogamous relationships across heterosexual, homosexual, or other, so along the LGBTQIA plus population, monogamous relationships. Most of those variations have been very well studied and documented within Gottman, with the same results, meaning this works for heterosexual couples, this works for gay and lesbian couples, this works for trans couples.
You figured out the tools, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And most of those studies, and again, I need to go, I'm overdue actually to go and do my refresher course for the latest stats and the things that have come out of that. I'm behind on my continued education right now. I'm so busy. I really need to get back on that horn and look at those numbers. But the last stats I saw with the Gottmans that came from the Gottman Institute that I'm remembering right now was single partners, monogamous, between two people, is where their stats were. And I believe that the open marriage and the swinging stuff were more of like those clinical, smaller studies of I'm using this here. And that makes sense to me because I use it within parents and children, siblings, family groups. So it makes sense that that's an effective communication style for those in non-traditional relationship types, such as open or swinging relationships. And why are we talking about the Gottmans? I've totally lost like squirrel.
I think my question
Where'd I go?
kind of pulled you off there, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. So coming back to addictions within Mormonism. Oh, that's what it was. My first experience really with kind of questioning the church on pornography use. That's how I got onto the Gottmans. Was the study was that it was detrimental to the relationship, but I'm kind of seeing some different things come out in the relationship or in the research now. And I don't have any of that in front of me, and I didn't come prepared with that. But that might not be the full picture, that there are couples that seem to be utilizing it without it damaging their relationship. That's something that I would need to, dive into the research a little bit more to understand better. But within the Mormon context, any pornography use was considered addictive. And that really came to light, Mason, with you. And so I'd like for you to excuse me, I'd like for you, if you're comfortable, to take that opportunity. And we talked about this. I'm not putting him on the spot, y'all. We talked about this before we jumped on the air.
You're putting me on the spot. It's just expected.
Right. This is, hey, Mason, why don't you talk a little bit about your story? But yes, I got his consent to bring this up before we jumped on the air today. So go ahead, Mason.
So multifaceted issue, right? It's not a single thing, but we've talked a little bit about the affair that happened
in 2004.
2004. Mm-hmm. Well, some of the other details of that are that just a few weeks after that, I deployed. And this was back in 2004, so there wasn't a lot of the same.
So for more information on the shit show of what happened in our lives, read my upcoming book, Trauma Bonded, Navigating Attachments Forged in Complex PTSD. Go.
Yeah, so just the couple of details that you need to be aware of to kind of understand this is, so that happened. I deployed. I had been in the Army only for a couple of years, so really no exposure, very limited exposure to anything like pornography before that. I didn't have any interest, I wasn't a normal teenager. There was no exploration. There was none of that for me.
Right. There was no masturbation for you,
right.
Correct? Mason is one of the few that did not, teenagers that they said don't masturbate, so we didn't.
Right, and never had any desire for it. So,
well, and I find it funny because your first introduction to how to have sex was a couple weeks before we got married, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to be on my period," and Mason's like, Mason's turning red. Be grateful this one isn't live, right? So I told Mason I was going to be on my period. And I don't think you even really knew what it meant to menstruate.
I didn't know what that was, yeah.
And so as I began to explain it, I kind of got that like, really? What? And we obviously got past it, y'all.
Welcome to the world of a naive Peter Priesthood boy.
Yeah.
I just didn't have any interest in knowing those kind of things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was no exploration.
And then the only other story that you had told me was when you were young, I think a cousin had showed you a pornographic image. And you stuffed the magazine in a cactus and set it on fire or something?
Sure, something like that, yeah.
Okay, no, give us the details.
So I was 8 or 9. It wasn't a cousin. It was one of the neighbors. And they had some, I don't know, pages from a Playboy or something like that. I can still remember some of those images, actually. Because it was
they've been seared into your brain.
It was traumatic for me at the time. So they hid them in a cactus. And so I went back later and pulled them out and burned them or tore them up or something. And doing my part to rid the world of evil.
2 pages of pornography at a time, y'all.
That's right.
And what's interesting is you say that was traumatic for me. That makes sense. At 8 years old, your brain is not equipped to deal with those types of sexualized images.
Well, and that's some of the issue that we're struggling with in today's society too, is that people are exposed to things way before they're mentally able or capable of handling them, and that certainly is an issue as well.
And for some kids, seeing that at 8 wouldn't bother them, and for others, it can be the most traumatizing thing. Like you can't say you saw this at 8, you're therefore going to have all these problems into perpetuity, into adulthood. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So before I got married, no desire to have sex, no desire to go anywhere past anything that I thought was inappropriate. And then we got married, of course, and that all changed. Very happy with that part of our lives.
And it's interesting because I was the complete opposite. Like I was experienced, I was proficient at necking and petting. And when it came to you, we only kissed heavily. Like hands were not where they were not supposed to be, y'all. We were worthy to go to that temple only because Mason walked away when things got too close to crossing that boundary. It was that important to you. Yeah. Whereas for me, I didn't really care. I was like, all right, let's go.
That's good to know. So anyway, 2004, I deploy. Never been away from you at all. I was gone for 6 months. And I actually didn't really struggle with pornography at that time. I had people had Maxim magazines and things like that, which in my mind at the time, that was pornography. Like some of what was in there was certainly borderline pornography. And I struggled with that just a little bit. And really, I mean, just a little bit.
Well, and I want to kind of expand on that. In my years working with the LDS population, males specifically, it's pretty common for males to come to me or their wives to come to me and talk about their husband's pornography issues. And then when they expand on it, it's things like the Victoria's Secrets magazine,
the swimsuit edition,
or the
of
swimsuit edition of
Illustrated,
Sports Illustrated, or Maxim, and these things. And that's a very common thing in Mormonism. It's like that's your gateway drug to pornography, and for many, many people, that is equivalent.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the things that go off in your brain and how pornography can be damaging to relationships in your body, it's not from that. We're talking about the very violent, like the worst of the worst pornography, where we start to really see brain changes and these things that you're being warned against, the stuff that even most people viewing porn don't see because it's so off-putting to humanity.
Right. Well, I think it's important to say that if this is something that's affecting your marriage or your relationship, study it out, figure
Get
out
help.
Because what your expectations are may not be healthy for your relationship, and certainly not healthy to healing. But you gotta venture into that. You gotta figure it out. And
absolutely. And we're gonna explore that a little bit later.
Okay, good. I thought that you probably would.
Right, because we don't want to minimize somebody's experience. Like if you're listening to this and you are you've been somebody who's used porn, or you've been the partner of somebody who's used porn and it's been damaging or harmful to your marriage, I do not want to minimize that experience.
Right.
We are going to talk about that and why that is. But right now we're kind of focusing on Mason's experience of thinking his use was addiction and where that came from, kind of that pattern of where our brains jump to why this is such a problem, when medically speaking, we're not seeing the data to support it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
And we will, because absolutely don't want to minimize. And my experience is different than anybody else's experience, and it is my personal experience. So struggled just a little bit with that. We were separated. It was difficult. And then the next time that when I came home, I would pull like 24-hour duty every once in a while. And at that time, this is probably 2006, 7-ish.
So a couple of years after the affair.
A couple years after the affair, a couple years after the deployment. And there was a lot of the stuff on the deployment. There was a lot of anger. There was bitterness. There was, and a lack of emotional connectivity. Like I didn't really know how to emotionally connect with you before. And the affair certainly didn't help that. And then leaving right away after that certainly didn't help that, because we had letters, we had email, they had Messenger, but that was patchy at best. And so it was very difficult.
Right. Your second deployment was much easier because we had Zoom or WhatsApp. We had ways to communicate. Yeah. That first deployment was...
It was rough for that kind of thing. And of course it was better than anybody had before that, but it was hard for connectivity and for us to be able to heal.
Well, and I want to say too, for you, what I remember is I went to the bishop, I confessed that the affair had occurred, and then it was over. Like, it was okay, now it's your job to forgive me, and we just move on because you had decided we were going to stay married. So there wasn't like, I had begged. I remember like, hey, we need to go talk to somebody. We need some help here. And you were like, no, it's good. It's forgive and forget. And so that was kind of this idea. And so, I remember when I found out about this, which was years later, I looked at these Maxim magazines almost as a way to get back at you for having done what you did. And then here you are 2 years later, and...
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to point out there that go back to one of the episodes that we recently released called Forgiveness as a Symptom. And I think I spoke in there and even mentioned a personal experience that we might talk about. Well, we didn't, and now we are, because for me, forgive and forget meant... We're not talking about it. We're moving on. It's going to be okay.
Think about it.
But there has
stopping, ignoring it.
Right. Yeah. And there has been a lot of resentment over the years from that, because I was never able to really work through it at the time in a healthy way. I thought I was doing the healthy thing, And years later, I'm discovering, of course, that wasn't the case. So there was some resentment, and anything that I did on deployment, so incredibly minimal that, I wouldn't even bat an eye at it now. It really was very minimal, but there was a lot of resentment going on there too. So then...
And it was hidden.
And it was hidden. Yeah. There's no way I was talking to you about that. And not that that's healthy. Like
Right.
I don't think that's healthy, but in my mind, there was no way I was bringing that up. And then in 2006-ish, in the middle of the night, they had all these Girls Gone Wild videos that would come on.
You mean on the television?
Yeah, on the television.
Oh, when you were pulling CQ?
Mm-hmm. They'd come up as these ads, and I would sit and watch them, and they're, of course, very erotic. They're meant to stimulate and want you to buy the videos and watch them, right?
Wait a minute. Are you saying you're a man and it worked?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And
healthy anatomy.
I didn't know how to. I'd never been exposed to that. There was no one I felt like I could talk to, because if I go to my bishop, there's shame. If I go to you, I feel like I've let you down. And I'm still a little resentful about what has happened. Although at that point in time, I'd mostly worked through that. And then a few times over the last 15 years since then, there's been exposure and use of pornography. And each time it's just filled with this guilt, this shame, this I've let you down. I don't want to be unfaithful to you. And I felt very unfaithful. And so I went to a bishop twice. Once I handed in my recommend. I said, look, this has gone on long enough. I'm serious about fixing this. And I was. And at that point in time, that's really when I've struggled so very much less since that point in time. But just the idea, and maybe this, we talked a little bit about this in, and maybe I can tie this in, but in the podcast about Satan and being codependent with Satan, there's the idea, our thoughts and our words and our works, everything will condemn us. And there's this big, I feel like maybe the intended message is to help us feel righteous guilt so that we'll repair what's going on in our lives. But I feel like one of the received messages is very much shame. And that shame does not lead to repair. It leads to hiding. It leads to darkness. It leads to silence.
Right. Well, and I want to say once again, as your wife, I don't think I was ever mad or angry that there had been some pornography use. I was mad that you hadn't told me about it. I was mad at the betrayal of it being hidden. But one of the other things, when we talk about this, is that you were in this position where if you go to your bishop and say, hey, these things are going on, I've looked at porn once or twice. You were in the bishopric starting in 2009? And so being able to talk about, it occurring once or twice as you were serving in that bishopric. Well,
It never happened during that time, actually.
It didn't. Okay. So it didn't happen while you were serving.
It happened before, and it happened sometimes after, but it never happened during that time or when I was a bishop. Okay. Never once.
Never crossed that line there for you. So, and one of the things that is really interesting though is that the first time you went to the bishop would have been like in the 2006 time frame. You told me it was the same bishop that had handled my disfellowshipment.
I'd forgotten about that, but yeah, you're
when
right.
I had the affair, and for him it was almost like, yeah, after what Sarah did to you, this makes sense. Don't do it anymore. It was like a non-issue, and I'm sitting here going, wow, that's an interesting double standard. So that was my first experience of women getting punished more harshly than a man for sexual sin. And frankly, for my affair, I did not get punished that harshly. We had a convert bishop who was very uncomfortable with having to hand out any of that type. It was not his thing. He had a counselor that was out for blood, but the bishop himself, was very gentle and very much kind of like, hey y'all, let's just let this go. Let's why are we talking about this? Leave it alone type of a thing. Which I was grateful for. But then the second bishop that you confessed to, it was very much, here's the addictions recovery book, and you need to attend these meetings because you've got an addiction. And that's really where I'm like, hey, that's not uncommon, because once again, oftentimes when I'm working as a counselor, I'm getting these gentlemen that are coming to me and I'm like, all right, tell me, how often, where are you accessing? Let me gather this data so that we can form a treatment plan. And I've got, bishops handing people the addictions recovery workbook, telling them they need to go to meetings so that they can get this under control, so that they can talk about it. Right. They don't know how to deal with this.
They don't know. They don't know how to deal with addiction at all. Most of them.
And, I'll smush a couple client stories together here in order to protect confidentiality, but it's not an uncommon thing for me to have somebody come in and tell me it's just, the Victoria's Secrets magazine, or, I got on a site on accident and then I went back to that site one more time. And since then I've never done it. That happened 5 years ago. I got to get this addiction thing under control. And I'm going, that's not addiction.
Right.
But from their bishop, from the church, any use of pornography can be and often is considered addiction. And then they send you to this addictions thing. And Mason got extended that calling to be the addiction specialist, and my head about exploded for the simple fact that that program is not evidence-based. It's not. It's sort of designed after the AA program, but with some really toxic twists in there. And I was like, Mace, I have a hard time with you being a part of that program as a client, as a participant or as a facilitator, because I've seen it and it's damaging. It doesn't help people heal. It actually makes you more likely to go back and participate in a behavior that doesn't fit with you. And I really want to talk about this. When we talk about pornography in marriages or in relationships, really what, from a mental health perspective, what I'm looking at is what are the values and morals of the individuals in that relationship, and what are the expectations and standards and boundaries for the couple inside that relationship. And outside that relationship, it's nobody else's business. So if I've got couple A over here who feel like, pornography use enhances their sexual satisfaction and they feel closer together and it's been educational for them, great. But couple over here, any use of it makes them uncomfortable. They don't want it. It's a no-go no matter what the situation is. Also great. As the mental health therapist, I explore where those boundaries are for the individual couples. And we don't work on the pornography use. We work on communication and honoring boundaries within the relationship that you're trying to facilitate. And I see things across the board. I mean, there are definitely things that I've got clients engage in with pornography and strip clubs and, other things that definitely would be a no-go in Mason, yours or my relationship. But when I give them these satisfaction inventories, they're doing great. And I'm assuming they're being honest. Normally when people come to me, there's a lot more honesty with me than other people. I mean, that's kind of when you're paying for somebody to help you fix your life and you're really wanting things fixed. My last couple, the pornography wasn't the issue that I saw. It was communication about household tasks. It was the division of labor within the home where one person was feeling overwhelmed and the other one wasn't. And when I inquired about the pornography, they're like, look, we're happy with that. Like, neither of us have a problem. It's taking out the trash or whatever. And so it's very individualized. And I want our listeners to recognize that what works for one couple doesn't necessarily work for another couple. And that's okay. I think the bishop needs to stay the hell out of that altogether.
Well, I think that's part of the issue, is that the whole process is individualized for a couple, but there's such a huge variation of how a bishop will respond to the situation. We talked about early on in this podcast about the abuse that had happened in that article from the Associated Press, and how in that case, the bishop continued to work with this person who was actively sexually abusing his daughters. And there's allowances made and no reporting and all of that. And then in other cases, you've got somebody that has looked at pornography a couple of times and you're kicking them to an addiction program. I think I understand why you think it's a program based in spirituality and it will help people to get their spiritual lives back in order, and then they'll be able to kick the addiction. You know what? For some people, that probably works.
Well,
but in general, it's almost like a kicking it to the curb, but I'm going to still hold your spirituality over your head on this one.
Right, but I want to bring this full circle, Mason. You know, we talked about in the beginning of this, or middle of this podcast, that one of the identifying features that we almost always see in people who struggle with addiction is not feeling attached within their relationships.
Right.
There's an attachment issue going on. Now, if we go to most effective addiction programs, there's a semblance of a higher power, or there's a lot of spirituality that goes in here. And then we go back to my 4 pillars of wellness thing, where I identify spirituality as being our ability to connect with other living beings, whether that be a higher power or nature or my kids or my partner or animals or trees or whatever. That spirituality is absolutely a huge part of healing from the disease of addiction.
Absolutely.
But how you project or how you engage spirituality is very different. But I want to point out, if addiction is fueled by a lack of attachment, and we treat that spiritually in order to enhance attachments with a higher power and with the people around you. You know, one of the things that you're going to see in AA programs and other addiction programs is making amends, true amends to the people that you hurt.
There's a process. Yeah.
Communicating, having a sponsor, having somebody you reach out to. All effective addiction treatments facilitate healthy attachments. That's like one of the primary goals. And Gabor Mate is another person, the ghosts of addiction. So Gabor is Gaber, Mate, Mate maybe, is another one of the world's leading researchers and specialists on understanding addiction. And he brings this out: to heal from addiction, you have to heal relationships. You have to heal. And that doesn't mean heal relationships that have been traumatizing to you. It's, if I can't heal those relationships, I need to be able to engage and attach in relationships in healthy ways. And that's why sponsors and mentors and whatnot can be so helpful on the road to recovery, is because there's an attachment. And like you were saying, Mason, in the church, there's so much self-shame that you isolated, like you withdrew from our relationship. I remember saying, something's going on here. You've got something going on that you're hiding from me. Like when you told me about this, it was, you have something that you're hiding from me that is interfering with us in the bedroom. And I don't know what that is, but I know that we need to get it out in the open. And that's when you had told me, hey, yeah, I've got these, I'm going to say maybe 3 or 4 times at this point over the course of 2.5, 3 years from when the affair happened to when you, because it was like the affair happened in May of 2004. And I think you told me around Christmas time of 2006, so about 2.5 years in this. And I was upset because you hadn't told me about it, because when you disconnect from the people that you're in a relationship with, you're more likely to actually develop a full-blown addiction.
Right, absolutely. And that's the struggle there. I don't want to be one of those people that says, hey, the way you're doing this completely sucks, because I don't have the education to do that. Like you've mentioned that you don't feel like the church's addiction program is helpful, that there's some toxic things in there. And you have the ability from the educated seat in which you sit to be able to make that kind of a judgment call. Whether or not you're right, you have the ability to make that kind of a judgment call. But what I do want to say is that there has to be focus on what kind of things do we do as an organization that prevent people from being able to talk about these things in a healthy way.
Absolutely.
Whether it's an addiction. Like if I go in and I tell my bishop, hey, yeah, last night I tried some alcohol, and he says, well, give me your temple recommend, that doesn't encourage me to want to talk to him in the future.
Right. That goes back to the why we lie.
Right.
If I'm going to punish you for a single sip or a single action, you're not likely to talk about it.
Right. I'm not, well, and everybody's different. Some people are going to, that right there is going to straighten them out. They'll never have that happen again. And other people are going to be like, whoa, wait a second. This is way over the top. I'm not doing this again.
I would say most people are going to kick and balk and scream because that's going to trigger that survival mechanism. You're taking away my access to what I have to have for eternal salvation. Therefore, it's going to trigger, I would say most people would not do well with a one and done type bishop.
Maybe so, but Mormonism does not tend to breed kickers and screamers.
Oh, yes, it does.
Not against church things because they hold your salvation in hand. Now, people get there, but in general, the general populace, if something like that happened, I feel like they're going to work through it with their bishop.
And I would say, based on my experience, that people within Mormonism, yes, they can be very docile, but that does not relieve them of that survival mechanism.
No,
and a one and done bishop is going to raise some eyebrows for sure on that. I do want to go back though and say this is that when it comes to the church's addictions recovery program, one of its strengths is the ability to connect the supposed victims, so the spouses of the porn addict, or the partners of the addict. It gives them a space to know that they're not alone. However, it doesn't facilitate talking about it in a way that really gives them tools to support the addict without shame and blame and those types of things.
That's a big deal.
But that is one of the, I used to say that the addictions recovery program really is for the quote unquote survivors. I hate that word when we're talking about porn addiction, just because people don't die from porn addiction very often. So anyway, sorry, squirrel in my brain that I cannot share on the air. Let me. So I want to kind of, Mason, if you're ready, if you're comfortable to shift away from pornography and talk about substances within Mormonism.
Absolutely. I think I've shared what I needed to share and
right.
Yeah.
And just reiterate, when it comes to from a mental health perspective, when we're talking about pornography use within the relationship, what I consider healthy and where I'm checking in with my clients is, again, individual morals and standards, and then the boundaries around those within a relationship. And nobody else needs to be in those decisions unless there's coercion, abuse, those types of things. We don't need to get anybody outside involved.
You're talking about a healthy relationship where people are able to talk about whatever's going on.
If we're in a relationship and we're like, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and try some porn and see how that affects our sex life, and we try it and it doesn't work or it makes one of us uncomfortable, I want you to be able to come back to your partner and say, hey, you know what? I didn't actually enjoy that. Can we reestablish this and go back to a no pornography marriage? Again, this is personal between the sexual partners. I think we really need to get bishops out of our sex lives. I think we really need to get Mormonism or any religion out of our sex lives. That needs to be very personal unless there is abuse. And I'm talking about coercion, forcing somebody to do things they don't want to do. Marital rape. There's a very real thing out there of non-consensual sex between married partners that is absolutely violent. So let's eliminate sexual violence. I also think that we need to make sure that age of accountability and age of understanding is there, because sex with minors, adult, like pedophilia, absolutely not okay because we're causing harm. But when we're talking about the use of something, then there's going to be different standards. Now, I have worked with true sex addicts where they cannot get off the computer. They're viewing porn all day. They might have even injured themselves sexually because of pornography, or they're no longer responding to the real human being in front of them. They've kind of deadened that.
Right.
Usually that comes because of very violent pornography, or, I mean, if you're using it all day, every day, yeah, you're going to desensitize some things.
Sure.
Absolutely, there is a line of addiction here, but within Mormonism, we don't see that as often as we do the I've used it a handful of times, right? Or I use it 3 or 4 times a month type of thing. And we could go into that, and we probably will go into those types of things with pornography at a future episode. But I want to.
So moving on to substances, right? Yeah.
Moving on to
Right,
substance abuse here. One of the things that was really interesting to me, Mason, when I left the church and I first started to try alcohol, was your paralyzing fear. And I'm going to call it a paralyzing fear. You really, really struggled. Do you want to talk about that? And again, I got his permission to talk about it before the podcast. I'm just opening it up now.
Well, I wouldn't say that it was paralyzing for me. I'm not going to say it didn't feel that way to you, of course, but I don't think it was paralyzing, but there was absolutely fear involved. And some of it was, I still hadn't really come to terms with the fact that you were leaving the church, and I was still very much caught up in the grief cycle, denial, things like that. And so if I wasn't in that situation, I imagine I would have handled this better than I did. But that was part of my experience. I was in denial. And so every time you did something like that, it was just one more witness to the fact that you have gone over the edge, right? Which I wouldn't call it that now, although, and in metaphorically, there's some truth to that kind of thing, right? But because I was still stuck in that grief stage, everything was just another insult to this thing I didn't want to have happen. I was in complete denial that this was going to happen, or just hoping that this was just a stage and you were going to move past this and we were going to be okay. And so it wasn't paralyzing for me, or at least the alcohol wasn't paralyzing to me. The alcohol was just a symbol of everything else that was going on. So even now, like, you say sometimes you feel like I'm still kind of looking at you funny, and I don't mean to. Like, I'm comfortable with what you do. But I'm also still going through that process a little bit. There's still, it's been a couple of years, but there's still some of that grief.
There's still that shadow when, meaning that, even though I've wrapped my head in academically, I'm okay and it doesn't bother me. There's still that initial response. There's still that little bit of discomfort at times that'll come across. And that's one of those things that we call the shadow of Mormonism, or shadow work is, just because I'm okay with it now doesn't mean that I don't. Sometimes it's right. We see that across all things.
And when it comes to your alcohol use, you have not demonstrated anything to me that is uncomfortable. Like, I'm not concerned about you becoming a drunkard or getting drunk or being in a situation where our kids are no longer safe anymore or driving. I don't have any of those concerns because you've demonstrated very much a responsible use of this quote unquote substance. It's been a responsible thing for you. And so I don't have any of those concerns.
Well, and I would say when I first started drinking, a lot of your fear, because when we talked about it, you were like, I'm just so afraid that you're going to become an alcoholic. And I was kind of like, okay, where is that fear coming from? And it wasn't really based in reality. And a lot of that, I think, is because Mormons will look at the alcohol as this big, bad, evil thing. And then their analogies tend to be drunk driving, horrible accidents, cirrhosis of the liver. It's bad. It's these extremes. And you're never exposed to adults who have healthy drinking habits.
Because that doesn't exist in the Mormon world. There's no such thing as healthy drinking habits.
Right. And I mean, as an example, one of your family members posted something recently, again on Facebook, about any alcohol going into your body at all. Any of it is a carcinogenic. It's terrible for you. It's bad for you. And that this one thing that somebody said debunks all of the 1 or 2 glasses of wine with dinner can be really healthy and good antioxidants and blah, 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 blah. And for me, I'm going, when we look at things that black and white, that this is so horrible for you, even one drop of it in your body is bad for you. That for me, I'm like, that's a confirmation bias of your Mormon beliefs, because from your Mormon standpoint, alcohol is a no-go. Like that one's pretty darn clear, which is still funny to me because Joseph Smith got the revelation and continued to drink and continued to own a bar where alcohol was served after getting this word of wisdom revelation, which we'll unpack a little bit more in our upcoming episode with Ian. Yep. But, I don't think most members knew that until recently. And I would say most still don't know that Joseph Smith got the revelation on the word of wisdom and continued to drink. Like, they know about coffee, but I don't think they recognize that Joseph Smith owned a bar.
Right, because we all get the story that, Emma Smith was complaining about the mess, and so Joseph Smith got the revelation, and then we all get the idea that everything changed at that point in time, and it really didn't.
And it didn't. I mean, Joseph Smith was drinking the night he got shot. And I'm not saying he was a drunkard the night he got shot, but they'd ordered up some alcohol, and they were drinking it when they got mobbed. Right. That's like I think it's in the jailer's record or something. Like, we've got that written down. And so, I would say that modern Mormonism does not have exposure to healthy drinking habits. And so I think that fear, Mason, of, oh my goodness, Sarah's drinking alcohol, she's going to become this alcoholic, blah, 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 was real. And I remember when I brought some hooch from Harmy's cheese store to my sister. Okay, so we've got this little touristy Harmy's cheese store. They sell all kinds of cheeses, and then they have their own blackberry moonshine and whatnot. And they make a delicious lemonade out of it. And so I bought some of that, and I took it to Arizona with me so that my sister and I could drink and bitch together. We were like, okay, we're just gonna like drink a glass or two and whine about life. And we were gonna whine with our wine, is what we said. We were really excited about it. And I think I had 2 drinks, she had 2 drinks. Neither of us were anywhere near being drunk. Neither of us were near being tipsy. We ended up laughing more than whining through this thing. But because the alcohol bothered my mom so much, my mom was visibly upset. Like, you could tell, not mad, but like sadness had consumed her. And I think a lot of that is my grandpa struggled with alcoholism for a long time, and he's been sober for years, but he didn't get sober until my mom was a teenager. And my grandmother's father was also an alcoholic. Pop was an alcoholic and drank. I mean, the man chugged his alcohol until the day that he passed away, and was probably somewhat inebriated when he killed himself. So my grandfather died of suicide, and
so there's lots of
trauma there for my mom,
that are swallowed up in a lot of not real fears.
But what was really interesting to me is I'm looking around, going, my kids are in bed, my husband knows where I am. I'm at home, I was at my parents' house. I'm not driving anywhere. I'm not doing, my sister's a responsible drinker as well. Like, we're not getting 3 sheets to the wind here. Where's this coming from? And again, it's that fear of that is ingrained in a lot of religious cultures. This is not exclusive to Mormonism, of if you try the substance once, you'll be hooked and you'll be an addict forever.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to harken back to what I said at the beginning, is that I'm not sure that Mormons as an organization are as concerned with you losing control as they are with you losing your soul. Like, any venture into anything that is forbidden, now your soul is on the line, and there's no healthy look at, you know what? This is okay. This is gonna be okay, right? Even if you're an active member and you go out and you got drunk one night, okay, right? Like, or you had a drink of alcohol, not even going to the I got drunk, right? This is okay. Let's look at where we are. Are we in a healthy place? Are there things going on that maybe we're hiding from? Lots of people use alcohol to hide from things.
Oh yeah.
Is that what's going on? You know what? No,
Well, and
I'm not
I would-
hiding from anything. I'm okay.
I would say I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think alcohol is considered the number one most damaging substance out there. It harms more families. People who are utilizing it
Right.
end up making decisions that harm more families, harm themselves, that, harm long-term health. I know that fetal alcohol syndrome in infants is usually a lot more debilitating than
Almost any
somebody
other drug.
that's used any other drug.
Yep.
Right. So I'm not here to say alcohol is healthy, go have fun.
Right.
But I am saying, once again, this is personal until you cross into true overuse, abuse, or addiction. But healthy alcohol use is very personal. Like for me, a glass of wine that I sip on while I make dinner makes me a much more pleasant person in the evening during the chaos of where's your homework, where's your shoes, do you need a shower, eat your dinner, brush your teeth, blah, blah, blah. Just that time of transition in our home. Times of transition in our home are always very stressful because
Sure.
we have so many special needs kids. And so when I drink a little bit of alcohol and it just kind of mellows me out, I'm a better mama. I am showing up better for my kids and my husband in the evening. But again, I'm within healthy limits for me, and I've never had an addiction problem to alcohol. If I was an alcoholic saying, I'm just going to have one drink of wine this evening, we know that that's not how addiction works.
Right.
And so if you've been an alcoholic, we don't want you drinking that one glass of wine. But if you have a healthy relationship with the substance, okay, and we're seeing things like marijuana. Is there addiction to marijuana? Hell yes, there absolutely is. But there's also medicinal use. There's also recreational use that can be within healthy limits and boundaries. Now, some of the other things, so Oxycontin, narcotics, used medicinally versus abuse, overuse, there's lines, there's barriers, and we've got to be really honest with ourselves in order to understand, are we in a use, an overuse, an abuse, or an addiction place?
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it comes back to, again, communication with yourself, communication with others. Like, why did your mom not just talk to you about this, right? Could she not have gone in and say, hey, I see you guys are getting ready to drink. What's going on? What's the plan? Oh, we're going to have a couple and we'll be fine. And then when you come out and you've had a couple and you're fine, there's this communication of, oh, you know what? That's fine. Or even to the point of, hey, this is my house. I don't want you to drink in my house.
Well, and we did mom.
Right. You cleared that with her. Right.
And she was like, no, that's fine. I don't want to see it, which is why, great.
But there again, I don't want to see it, right? It's like, it's
That's
almost
the
like
boundary.
asking somebody to hide something from you. And that's not what we want. We want to be able to communicate about this.
Well, and I want to kind of reiterate something, Mason, that you sort of said but didn't say as clearly. So I just want to bring this up and say, yes, there needs to be that communication. Also, I need to trust my partner. Mason, if you came to me and you said, hey, Sarah, I'm noticing that you're drinking 3 or 4 glasses of wine and that without it, you're just unreasonable and you're a beast to these kids, or you're drinking so much wine that you end up just going to bed and falling asleep and leaving me with everything.
You're breaking our budget by how much wine you're drinking. Yeah.
If the people I trust are coming to me with concerns about that is actually one of the things that we test for. Like when I'm asking, do you feel like it's a problem? Do the people around you feel like it's a problem?
Right.
And again, that would be where hey, Mormon church, if we can establish healthy boundaries around the use of tea, the use of tobacco, the use of alcohol, the use of coffee,
everything on that list. Yeah.
Everything. When we talk about things in moderation, if all I ever ate was tomatoes would be a very unhealthy thing for me. They'd
kill you.
Right. I cannot survive on just tomatoes, and tomatoes are generally thought to be a healthy fruit or vegetable, depending on if you're going with the blossom idea or the root idea or whatever. But it's a healthy food for us, but not in excess.
Right.
And so as we're looking at these things, we really need to be able to identify use, overuse, abuse, addiction, and that number one, it's personal.
Yeah.
We need to get bishops and leaders out of that. If you're going to bring your higher power in, or if there's a religious moral value that you're considering as you are personally making decisions for you, great.
Right,
But when
no
we start
problem.
to throw a blanket over that and say alcohol is bad for everybody, and if you drink it, you're risking addiction, okay, that's maybe a little bit extreme.
Right.
Because I would say the vast majority of adults who drink alcohol have a healthy relationship with it. I want to say, and I heard this on the radio the other day, I think it's 2 in 10 adults have an alcohol problem, which means 8 out of 10 adults do not.
Right.
And if we look at how many adults drink, it's more than 8 out of 10 adults drinking. So, so out of those 10, and yes, there are definitely adults in there that don't touch alcohol at all for whatever
but
reason.
Of the ones that are drinking,
and that's fine. And I think society needs to do a much better job of accepting and making room for those people that want their cocktails virgin or mocktails. Like, we need to create a healthy space for those individuals who don't drink as well. We need to see that too. But again, this is personal, and I would say individually personal. So just like the pornography, what are Sarah Westbrook's morals and standards around this? Now that I'm in a relationship with Mason, what are yours? Let's talk about each other's boundaries or morals and standards.
Right.
And now let's create
With
boundaries
room for movement and all that stuff.
And now let's create boundaries that we are comfortable with as a couple, and how are we going to support our children, and what are our children's, what are the boundaries for them when they're minors? What are the boundaries for them when they're adults? How do we do this? There needs to be a lot more nuance on this topic. So I hope that we've been able to kind of raise some awareness, kind of challenge a little bit of that, use equals addiction. It absolutely doesn't. And of course, there is no prophet or anybody that's come out and said use is addiction. I'm talking about a cultural phenomenon for those of you that have been inside of that culture.
Implied messages versus
implied
stated.
Perception. Those types of things. So hopefully we're able to raise awareness. Again, if you feel that you're having a struggle with addiction and you need somebody to reach out to, you are welcome to email me at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. I will be referring you or providing you with resources in our episode show notes. We're going to get some of the links for the addictions, the National Institute for Mental Health and addictions within that. So that way you have some of those links, programs, AA programs, NA programs, even the church's addictions. I'm sure there's a place for it. I'm sure it's worked for some people. I personally don't like it, but there's a lot of really good programs out there. If you need help, get help. If you are truly struggling with an abuse or an addiction, you're gonna need medical professionals on your side. You need medical professionals, you're gonna need mental health professionals, and usually more than one, and you're gonna need a group setting. We find that working through addictions in a group setting is much more effective than individual counseling alone. So it's, again, there's a team of people there, and I don't do the addictions specifically. I do the mental health side and the relationship healing side of addictions in my work. That's kind of where my wheelhouse is there. So I would definitely want to refer you to people who can meet those needs. So Mason, did you have anything else you wanted to say today before we close out?
I don't think so, except that if you didn't feel like this was helpful, we didn't cover everything that you thought might be helpful, please let us know. We would love to be able to readdress some of the things. We're not perfect, and we work on a timeline, and we work from our own perspective. So if there's something that came up that you feel like we could address more or better, please let us know. Let us help you the best way that we can. So thank you for being here. We love it. We love being able to share from our perspectives and from our experiences. Hopefully this is helpful for people. So thank you for joining us here at Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma.
Thank you so much. See you next time. Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page. Today's music provided by Run to Life and John Worthy Music. We are really excited, y'all, because we just had a great meeting with Alex, our producer, Alex Fidalis. We love you. And we are getting ready to start doing some live events. So keep your eyes open on social media. We will be announcing those on our Facebook page and Facebook group, Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. We'll get those scheduled for you. They will be special events, and we really cannot wait to see you there. Also, feel free to email us or reach out to us, or check us out on our website at daisygirlcommunications.com. Y'all, when the 7-year-old is hungry, apparently that's an emergency that we got to interrupt mom and dad for.